nobody hit you. Nobody screamed at you. There was food on the table, a roof over your head, and by every visible measure, you were fine. So why does something still feel missing? Why is it so hard to name what you need? Why do you feel emotions in other people's lives more easily than you feel them in your own? Why, when someone asks how you're doing, do you go blank? Not because you're hiding something, but because you genuinely don't know. There's a name for what happened to you, and it didn't leave marks anyone could see, but it shaped the way you experience yourself, your relationships, and your faith in ways you are still living with today. Childhood emotional neglect is one of the most difficult psychological wounds to identify, precisely because it is defined not by what happened, but by what didn't. It is the consistent absence of emotional attunement in childhood, the needs that went unnoticed, the feelings that were never named, validated, or responded to. The child who cried and was told to stop, the child who was excited and was met with indifference, the child who was frightened and was handed a solution instead of comfort. Not because their parents were monsters, but because their parents were themselves emotionally limited, overwhelmed, or simply never taught how to respond to emotional experience. And so an entire dimension of the child's inner world was left alone, unattended, to figure itself out. Dr. Jonas Webb, who has done more than anyone to bring this concept into public awareness, describes childhood emotional neglect as a subtle but powerful force, one that leaves the person feeling fundamentally disconnected from themselves. Not traumatized in the way the word trauma is usually understood, not shattered, just quietly hollow, just subtly out of touch with their own interior. And because there is no dramatic event to point to, no clear before and after, no single moment of rupture, the person almost never understands what happened to them. They only feel its effects, a vague emptiness, a difficulty with intimacy, a tendency to minimize their own needs, a sense that other people's emotional lives are more real and more valid than their own. This is what makes childhood emotional neglect so insidious in Christian communities specifically, because many of its most visible effects, selflessness, minimizing personal needs, putting others first, not burdening people with your feelings, are praised as spiritual virtues. The person who never asks for help is seen as strong. The person who always attends to others' emotions while ignoring their own is seen as servant-hearted. The person who can describe theology clearly but cannot describe what they are feeling in a given moment is seen as mature and grounded. What nobody says out loud is that these patterns can be just as much a product of emotional neglect as they are evidence of spiritual formation. And the difference matters enormously, because one comes from fullness and the other comes from a wound. What did childhood emotional neglect actually look like in the homes of many Christians? It looked like a parent who was physically present but emotionally absent, providing materially while remaining unavailable emotionally. It looked like a household where feelings were considered indulgent, weak, or spiritually suspect, where the appropriate response to distress was prayer and scripture, not acknowledgement and comfort. It looked like never being asked how you felt, or being asked and having the answer immediately corrected or redirected. It looked like learning, gradually and completely, that your emotional world was not interesting to the people who mattered most to you. And so you stopped showing it, and eventually you stopped fully feeling it. Psalm 139:13 says that God knit you together in your mother's womb. The full self, not just the spirit, not just the mind, but the emotional self, the feeling self, the part of you that experiences joy and grief and fear and longing, was intentionally woven into your design. The emotional life is not a liability. It's not a spiritual immaturity to be overcome. It is part of what it means to be made in the image of a God who, according to Scripture, grieves, delights, is moved by compassion, burns with anger, and weeps at a tomb. To be cut off from your emotional experience is not holiness, it is a loss. And it is a loss that can be healed. If this is describing something you've never had words for before, subscribe to this channel. Every week I create content at the intersection of psychology and Christian faith. I don't want you to miss what's coming. So what are the signs that childhood emotional neglect is something you carry? Because most people who have experienced it have spent their entire lives not recognizing it and being genuinely surprised when someone names it clearly. You might notice that you have a difficult time identifying what you're feeling in real time. Not suppressing, genuinely not knowing. Someone asks, "How does that make you feel?" And you go blank, or you describe what you think rather than what you feel. You might notice that you are much better at attending to other people's emotional needs than your own. That you can sit with someone in their pain with great care, but that sitting with your own pain feels foreign, uncomfortable, even self-indulgent. You might notice that you routinely minimize your own needs, convincing yourself that what you want doesn't really matter, or that asking for something is too much of a burden, or that your struggles are not as serious as other people's struggles and therefore don't deserve attention. You might notice that intimacy, real, emotionally exposed intimacy, produces a kind of low-grade anxiety even when you want it. That being fully seen feels risky in a way you can't entirely explain, and you might notice something that is perhaps the most painful effect of all, a persistent sense that something is wrong with you. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet background conviction that you are somehow less than, emptier than, more fundamentally lacking than the people around you. Without being able to say why or point to anything specific that caused it. Healing from childhood emotional neglect begins with something that sounds simple but requires enormous courage. Learning to take your own inner experience seriously, not performing emotion, not manufacturing feeling, but genuinely turning toward what is happening inside you with the same interest and care you would extend to someone you love. This is called self-attunement, and for the person who grew up in an emotionally neglectful environment, it is a completely foreign skill. It has to be learned from scratch. It has to be practiced imperfectly over time. It also requires grief, because at some point in this healing process, you will need to feel the weight of what you did not receive, not to assign blame, not to stay in bitterness, but because the loss was real. An ungrieved loss does not disappear. It waits, and in the safety of genuine healing work, in therapy, in honest community, in the presence of a God who, according to Isaiah 53, is described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, that loss can finally be acknowledged and released. If what we've talked about today is something you want to go deeper with, I created a structured 7-day journey specifically designed to help you calm your mind and begin working through the patterns your nervous system has been carrying. It's called the 7-Day Guided Journey to Calm Your Mind. The link is in the description below. It's a real next step, practical, gentle, and built for exactly this kind of inner work. You were not designed to live disconnected from yourself. The emotional life God wove into you was not a mistake. And the path back to it, however long it takes, however unfamiliar it feels, is one of the most faithful things you can walk. Subscribe to this channel. Every week I create content at the intersection of psychology and Christian faith because your inner life matters. You are not alone in this.